He says that if he didn't report things immediately, someone else would have got the headline. So he just wanted to be the guy to be bringing all the news. And he was. But at what cost? It's astonishing that he didn't stop to think about the potential repercussions on this woman's life and also Raphael's life.
Do you know there are better detectives and journalists on Reddit than this guy?
Yeah, internet sleuths. You should have got them on this case.
Yeah.
She could have gone to jail forever, and he's just directing all this attention to an area that's just making the newspapers more and more money rather than towards the objective truth.
Yeah.
So he genuinely seems to believe that he didn't play a role in this at all, and he puts more blame on the police investigation than he does on himself and the media. What a motherfucker.
Yeah.
Just can't believe it. He's still about today.
Still spreading lies.
Nick Pisa. Fuck you, Nick. Welcome to the Compendium, an assembly of twists, turns, and courtroom churns. For those of you tuning in for the very first time, I am your host, Kyle Reese.
And I'm your co-host, Adam Cox. Welcome back for part 2
of the Amanda Knox and the Meredith Kercher story.
You left us on a bit of a cliffhanger last time.
I did, didn't I? Before we get into that, you're listening to the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things. We are a weekly variety podcast where I, Kyle Reese, tell Adam Cox all about a topic that I think you will find both fascinating and intriguing. And today, this is part 2. So if you haven't listened to part 1, stop now, go listen to that first, and we'll wait. So, Adam, do you want to tell listeners about what happened up to this point?
So Amanda and Meredith met at university and they're studying in a town in Italy.
Mm-hmm.
So Amanda and Meredith start off quite close, or seem to be, and they're thrown together in university. But then they both, I guess, start to form different friendship circles. So whilst they're not close, they've developed other relationships. So Amanda has developed a relationship with a guy, whereas Meredith's hanging out with her girlfriends, I guess.
And then, of course, 6 weeks or about 2 months into their first term of their year abroad, Meredith is sadly murdered brutally, and they find her in her bedroom. The door is locked. There is a mysterious poo in the toilet.
Oh, yes, the mysterious poo.
And Meredith has been brutally murdered. She's been stabbed in the neck. And very quickly, all the attention turns straight to Amanda Knox and Raphael.
Yep, and so they were acting quite weird when the police come. What was the prosecutor, Menini? So they were acting kind of weird. I guess they were comforting each other. Mm-hmm. That's what they were saying, and that's their sort of perspective on it. But I think from the outsider perspective, it just looked a little strange, like almost a bit detached, maybe not.
That's it, yeah. And I think it was all orchestrated from this Manini guy. He notices these two people just standing kind of oddly on the front lawn while the investigation is going on. And he just gets a sense that somehow they must be involved because your roommate has just been murdered and then stand there cuddling with your partner, essentially.
Yeah. So Amanda's making a series of unfortunate mistakes, which she doesn't realize she's doing, but to an outsider, it just looks a bit odd, which is causing sort of suspicion when she's being interrogated by the police.
Yeah.
So she quickly realizes, because up until this point, she hasn't got a solicitor or a lawyer to defend her. And then she realizes, actually, they're pinning this on me. So she needs, her mum advises her, get a solicitor quick.
That's it, yeah. And because, of course, she is this beautiful, blonde American woman, and because the press are involved from the very beginning, they deem this as the better angle. And then as a result, what ends up happening is the world press kind of hone in on this just to sell more papers, which is just horrendous, really, because they're taking away from the investigation. What they end up saying at the Supreme Court is that it's a combination of terrible investigation and also the media that ends up causing this horrendous shit show of a case. So, yeah, the media have got a lot to answer to, as far as I'm concerned. So we ended off last week's episode with Amanda being coerced into falsely admitting that she had seen or been involved in the murder in some way.
Which I still find so bizarre, but as you were saying that she hadn't had sleep for like over a day, was it like 30 odd hours? And she signs a confession, even though she doesn't really remember saying it, mistakenly being involved or somehow suggesting she's involved or knows something. She comes to her senses the next day when she's had a bit of sleep and rest, and then she's like, uh-oh.
Yeah, what have I done? But we'll touch upon this towards the end of today's episode, where we talk about some of the techniques that have been employed within the Italian justice system, which largely in many countries has now been banned. And we'll talk about what some of those techniques are, because they're really effective in terms of interrogating people. But what they do is yield a massive amount of kind of false confessions in a lot of high-profile crimes. So we'll go into what that is and how that kind of works, like on a real compendium level basis, like not going in too deep, but you'll get a sense of what's happened here with Amanda. But
yeah, I'm intrigued by these techniques. Is it something I can use in an everyday life that I might be able to use getting out of paying, I don't know, a gas bill or something?
Or getting me to, what happened to the chocolate rounds, Kyle?
Yeah, things like that. When my stuff goes missing, I can then find out where it's gone.
So last week we wrapped up with the dreadful murder of Meredith Kercher and the ensuing, obviously, witch hunt that kind of happened as a result of the press coming after Amanda Knox. Now, today we're going to delve more into the actual trial, Amanda's prison time, and literally everything else. So, after Amanda is coerced into providing her false confession where she accuses Patrick, that's her boss, you remember him, of essentially murdering Meredith, the police arrest him. And after a few weeks, he is, of course, released because his alibi for where he was at the night is solid and there's no evidence linking him to the crime scene or to any of the girls anyway.
What was their original hunch with him? That just seemed so odd to me.
It's all kind of leaning on that text message.
Okay, yeah, that's it. That's right. I'll see you later.
That's it. So understandably, Patrick is really pissed off at Amanda, and he does speak out against her, which obviously doesn't do her any favors, especially kind of in the court of public opinion. Because so let's continue. So Amanda goes into intake and she's put into solitary. She's on her own. So every day, doctors are asking her if she wants sedatives or antidepressants, but she consistently refuses. She says that it's really important for her to maintain a level head throughout the entire process rather than being drugged up, because she's already been fallen victim to kind of the police already and their tactics. So she's like, I need to stay as level as humanly possible. And so what she does is she starts journaling, and that's how she spends most of her time. Now, about a week in, after she's been given a series of tests, they wrongly and they deliberately tell her that she is HIV positive.
What?
It turns out that the prosecution can literally say whatever they want to sway their case. So after telling her this, they bug all of her conversations with her parents, and basically they're trying to see if, like, Amanda can get into a desperate state, thinking that maybe she's dying or giving up and then just confess to the crime. That's the thinking behind this, which is just horrendous.
That's crazy.
It's awful. So they also force her to write out a list of everyone that she's ever had sex with. I think it's like a requirement that you have to inform all your sexual partners if you get diagnosed with HIV. But the reason why police want this information is because they believe that someone else was involved in the murder.
So they're using this to trick her into revealing all her recent encounters.
Correct, yes. Because I think when she goes to court, if it's just her on her own, that's not going to stand well. But if they can prove that another male was involved, then potentially that can help reinforce this idea that there was a second or a third person involved in this murder. So they're playing a real dirty game, basically.
Yeah.
So eventually her prison diary gets leaked to the press. And again, it gets massively misinterpreted because she writes in it about everyone she's ever had sex with. And the press are like, see, she's a whore.
I remember them doing this as if she's some sort of, going around sleeping with everyone.
That's right. And it just keeps reinforcing this kind of idea that she's this femme fatale, right? So when investigators go through Raphael's apartment, they find a kitchen knife and the blade was like 17.5 centimeters. The police point fingers at it, claiming that this to be the kind of the true murder weapon, and it essentially being really the sole clue linking Amanda Knox to the scene. But the truth is, of course, that the knife has never been used in any crime at all, but somehow forensics find traces of Amanda's DNA on the handle and Meredith's DNA on the blade, which they call the double DNA knife.
That's got to be staged or planted, right?
Well, we'll get onto this. So based on all the forensic data, the prosecution are now suggesting that the crime was committed by 3 people, which shifts the story to a sex game involving Amanda and Raphael, which is bullshit because later on, when the case is on appeal, they discover footage of the forensic team mishandling the evidence. Like they're not changing their gloves in between testing various items and like different pieces of the evidence. And they're just all bundled together. They're all like on top of each other. They're touching each other, all just getting cross-contaminated.
With you, that's how that might have happened.
Exactly. There's a million reasons how their DNA could have got on the knife. And remember, it's trace DNA, which means that it's such minimal amounts that it could have got on there in any number of ways. Amanda lived with Meredith as well. So Amanda could have been at home. She could have got DNA on her hands or her clothing or something. She could have been wearing maybe one of Meredith's jumpers. She could have been over at Raphael's house. They could have been cutting, like chopping up vegetables. She might have wiped the knife blade on her jumper or whatever. That's got Meredith's. There's so many different possibilities there.
Yeah.
Another piece of evidence tying Raphael and Amanda to Meredith's murder was the late discovery of Meredith's bra clasp. This was found weeks later and it was tucked under a carpet and was initially overlooked by the investigators. Now, the clasp carried DNA from Raphael, Amanda, and Meredith, and the prosecutors interpreted this specific location of kind of Raphael's DNA as an indicative way of how he had managed to unfasten her bra clasp because of where the DNA was on it.
Okay.
What's weird is that there's a scene which is caught on camera where a detective demonstrates to the courtroom how Raphael would have unclasped the bra. So when she's showing the court, oh my God, she's so smug and proud of herself. And she has the audacity to say, well, my bra's a little bit bigger, but oh well. Which is like,
really?
This is a court case.
Yeah.
What kind of shit show is this, Adam?
Pipe down.
Right. So now, even though they find small traces of Raphael and Amanda's DNA in various places, remember, we're not talking about huge amounts of data. We're talking about trace amounts of DNA, like small amounts. They do, however, find tons of DNA from a single male who is not Raphael. And this DNA is all over the crime scene, including this guy's semen, which is found on Meredith's body.
So have they just conveniently ignored all this evidence and gone, but, there's enough of it on Raphael? Well,
they have this evidence, but they don't want to lose sight of Amanda and Raphael as part of this investigation. Maybe it's a sunk cost fallacy where they've come this far, so they need to try and make it work. But essentially, that's foreshadowing there. They're going to try and make this work.
I was going to say, this is really trying to fit a round peg hole into a square.
So this DNA belonged to a guy named Rudy Guede.
We don't know him, do we?
Yes, we do. Remember, this is the guy they met through the lads that lived downstairs. That one night when Meredith and Amanda were walking home, they stopped off at a bar and they met the guys, and with them was a guy called Rudy. He's the guy from the Ivory Coast.
Okay.
The police, they are, of course, frustrated because Rudy doesn't really fit the narrative that they're trying to tell. So because of the large amount of DNA from Rudy, they have to factor him in some way. But they don't want to lose Amanda and Raphael from their story. Mm-hmm. So they arranged for one of Rudy's friends to Skype with him and record a conversation where Rudy admits that he met Meredith that night and went back to her apartment. But they didn't have sex because she didn't have a condom. So he says that he goes to the bathroom, and while he's there, he hears a struggle. When he comes back, he finds Meredith dead, and he decides that he's going to flee the scene. And 2 days later, he ends up leaving the country and heading to Germany.
I'm sorry, this sounds so sus.
It is so sus, right?
You're hearing all this commotion. You're in the bathroom. You're hearing all this commotion. I'm sure she's screaming. She's not just being quite timid and quiet at this point. And he's like,
oh, she's been killed. Oh,
yeah, that sounds a bit...
That was quick. How did that happen? Oh.
Yeah, well, Oh, God, I better be going.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, I've got a train to catch.
So I'm sorry, I don't buy this.
No, I don't buy it at all. It's absolute crap.
So Rudy tells his friend this. He makes not really a confession, but he admits this on a Skype call.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a closer look at Rudy, who he is as a person, what his background is, and then we can dive back into the case. So Rudy was born on the 26th of December 1985 in a small town on the Ivory Coast of Africa. Now, Rudy moved to Perugia in Italy with his father at around about the age of 5 years old. Now, his father was rarely present in his life. And so Rudy was primarily cared by like a combination of teachers and various parents who could rotate their duties to just make sure that he was okay. Like he had a place to stay, but they just wanted to check on him, make sure he was eating and that he'd managed to get into the house at night. And do you know what I mean? Banding together. It takes a village to raise a child, basically. And this is what this neighborhood is pretty much doing. Overall, he was kind of well-liked and he was described as polite, he was non-violent, and he was a bit like kind of melancholic, if you will, like a bit, well, how would you describe melancholic?
A bit serious, very somber.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
I guess that. I don't imagine him being a sprightly kind of kid based on that description.
Mm.
However, often Rudy would find himself locked out of his house when his dad would just go AWOL. So he spends a lot of his time just wandering the streets at night, and he describes his father at about this time of his life like physically and mentally like abusive towards him. So it's not really a great relationship, and wherever he can, he will just rather just not be near his dad.
Mm-hmm.
So despite him not having a nurturing father figure, Rudy does have several other men in his life, including a priest and several basketball coaches. Now, Rudy was an extremely skilled basketball player, and he was actually playing semi-pro at around about the age of 16. And he also had ambitions to kind of forge a career in the hotel industry. In 2004, Rudy is playing semi-pro basketball for a team in Perugia. And here he becomes friends with a son of a wealthy kind of entrepreneur. His name is Paolo. How do I pronounce his name? Caparelli? The Caparellis.
Okay, Caparelli, yeah.
So he just so happened to own the local basketball team. The family decide to kind of adopt Rudy until he turns 18, which provides him with more of a stable life. Rudy, soon after this, starts to neglect his responsibilities and his studies. At first, the family kind of stick with him and continue to offer him the support that he needs. They hire a tutor and they find him a job. But they end up discovering that Rudy has just been lying to them about like his whereabouts and his performance at school and also on the basketball court. And this is where things just start spiraling for Rudy. So Elena, who is Rudy's adopted sister, she recalls how Rudy struggled to grasp the basic principles of right and wrong around about this time of his life. Because before he was really good, but then all of a sudden he just dropped off a cliff.
What kind of, or do we understand what made him flip a little bit? Because it seems like he's quite a sweet kid and quite normal, really.
You're going to find out why in a second.
Okay.
All right. Eventually, when he turns 18, the Caparellis decide that they are just going to cut ties with him completely. They tell him that he needs to find his own path because he's just not showing them any respect anymore. And he's not doing what he's required because he's still like a young kid, right? If you want to live under our roof, we're happy to support you, but you need to be pulling your weight. So they just say goodbye to him.
Imagine a bit like Peggy Mitchell, but Italian. Get out of my house. But more like, get out of my house.
Ooh. I don't think you're allowed to use the hand gestures.
What? No, I can use a hand gesture for Italian swear words.
No.
Yeah.
You're not Italian.
But really?
Rudy moves in with his aunt, Giorgetta, who is now living in Milan, which is obviously about a 5-hour kind of train journey from Perugia. Now, in Milan, Rudy is doing marginally better. He got along with his aunt and her new husband. He gets a job at a cafe and starts dating an Italian girl. And life was looking really good for him at this point. So there's rubbing shoulders with the likes of Giorgio Armani, who he meets at a nightclub. And at this stage of his life, he was living the life and he was really proud of how things were going. He'd kind of turned his life around.
Well, yeah, if you're hanging out with Giorgio Armani, you're not doing too bad.
That's it. So notice this, right? So he was a good little kid. He turned a bit naughty. Now he's good again.
Well, that feels like that's probably quite common with a lot of male teenagers growing up a little bit, maybe.
Well, he seems to do this a lot.
Okay.
And this is what suggests that he might have a psychological disorder, because other things are going to start happening, which you're going to start thinking, that's a bit weird.
A bit like bipolar or something? Or
Possibly. I think the way we're going to describe it in a moment is it's more like a personality disorder.
Okay.
His boss gets arrested for some kind of crime. I think it's like drug-related or something. And the cafe that he's working at ends up going bust, leaving Rudy jobless. So Rudy returns back to Perugia. And in the spring of 2007, he asks Mr. Caparelli for some help. So they decide that they're going to graciously rent him an apartment near a nearby college campus. And that's when he starts hanging around with some of the students. Now, he would play basketball on the courts across the street from number 7 Via della Pergola. Well, that's the apartment that obviously Amanda Knox and Meredith Kercher were living. And that's exactly also where Amanda says that she met Patrick in her confession. It's these basketball courts.
Right.
Obviously, that never happened. So with the guys Rudy plays basketball with, he earns the nickname The Baron after Baron Davies, an NBA player on the Golden State Warrior team. Now, I mention this because this is the name that the guys in the apartment downstairs know him as, right? Like when the police are questioning them about Rudy, they're like, who's that? Like, oh, you mean Baron? Yeah, we're like, we don't know him, but we know this guy called Baron because he's been going by this different name for like ages. So he soon befriends an American student also from Seattle, which this was interesting. I didn't realize that actually the number of students that come over from the American West Coast, specifically Seattle, just like Amanda, is huge. There's loads of Americans in Perugia every year. That's kind of their main program of study, if you will, where they send their students over as one of the options that they can choose to go to Perugia, the University of Foreigners. So this guy's named Victor, and Victor found him a little bit strange, but they still hung out quite a lot. Victor says that Rudy was a great dancer, he was charismatic, but he was just a little bit strange. What he says specifically is that Rudy would spend the night over at his apartment quite a lot, even though he had his own place. He just had this thing of not wanting to ever go home. So his roommates didn't really care too much at first, but then Rudy started doing some other stuff, really weird stuff in his sleep.
Right.
He was a prolific sleepwalker.
Okay.
So one time he was sleepwalking in the middle of the night and he was acting like he was a teacher in a classroom, and he was using the dresser as a blackboard, and he was slipping in and out of speaking Italian and English. And he would then sometimes sleepwalk right out of the apartment, and he would wake up like miles and miles away.
Miles away?
Yeah. So he would proper go for it.
That would freak me out.
It would freak me out, especially waking up and going, shit, where am I? So he would even ask them to hide his keys because he didn't know sometimes where he would end up putting his keys, and he would often lose them in his sleep. So sometimes people say that they also saw him crawling on the floor and barking like a dog, which I think is funny.
Brilliant.
So Victor also recalls Rudy passing out on the toilet several times, usually after like smoking a little bit of weed. Now, Victor says that Rudy wasn't really a heavy drug user at all, but even if he smoked just a little bit, it would really affect him in really strange ways.
Okay.
And he would just end up acting really weird.
So I see what you mean by actually maybe there has some kind of disorder. If he's sleepwalking, he's affected by drugs in this capacity.
Yeah.
Maybe there is some kind of imbalance.
And the bad behavior as well.
Okay.
It's a bit messed up. Not to the point where I don't think a little bit of maybe psychiatry will can help.
Yeah, or probably just understanding what he has and finding ways to deal with it. And it doesn't feel like it's something that would really stop him from having a good quality of life.
So Victor's time in Italy was almost up, and he was getting ready to head back to Seattle. So it was roughly this time that Rudy made friends with the Italian guys who lived downstairs from the apartment of Meredith and Amanda. And at this time, he was still going by the name of Baron while he was at their house. So some of the Italian guys are starting to get a little bit tired of Rudy, right? He's always coming over to their place, and he just seems to not want to sleep at his house for whatever reason. He just doesn't ever spend any time there. And he's getting this entire apartment completely paid for him. And it's not even that far away from where these guys are, but he's just always there.
Is he lonely?
Do you think?
Don't know. Or they've just got food and he doesn't want to do shopping, so he comes over and helps himself.
He seems like he's quite a popular guy, though. He's going to nightclubs, he's meeting people, he knows how to socialize.
He knows Giorgio
Armani. So they talk about, again, his weird sleeping habits too, and they also mention the time that he fell asleep on the toilet. He was also found asleep on the toilet in Meredith and Amanda's apartment too, which he seems to have this issue with toilets and pooing and big shits and stuff.
Oh, I see where this is going.
But I don't know where it is going. It's just weird that so many people have brought up that he falls asleep in the toilet, and then one of the biggest clues at the crime scene was this big old poop in the toilet. I just don't get it.
So we're thinking he might have sleepwalked, killed this Meredith, and then took a poo and then left?
Do you think? I thought that's certainly where it was going, but it doesn't seem to make an appearance in his appeal or in anything. I don't think it seems to be a case that he makes in court.
Okay.
Certainly not the sleepwalking stuff.
And the poo?
The poo doesn't really factor into it, but I think the poo should factor into it a lot more.
I feel like they should have
I agree.
done a lineup.
I tried to find out more about this anyway, and it seems that after his arrest, the sleeping behaviors are classified as some kind of psychogenic, dissociative kind of state thing that he's got going on. Apparently, it's a rare psychiatric disorder, and it's characterized by kind of amnesia, personal identity issues, including memory loss, personality erasure. So apparently, these states that he gets himself into can last like months, days, or even longer.
Right.
So I'm wondering if that's what's happening here. And again, as you said, could this be one of the reasons why he ended up killing Meredith?
Because he went into this weird state.
Yeah, this dissociative kind of personality state. It's weird, isn't it? So apparently in some criminal trials, this has been used by other people who have committed crimes, and it has been quite effective, but it doesn't seem to be the case that he used it in his.
Right, okay.
I'm assuming they would have been prepared to use it in his case. So about a month before Meredith's murder, Rudy starts getting into trouble. Up until now, he'd been pretty clean with no real run-ins with the law. But on October the 13th and 14th, a local law office and a few other businesses are broken into, and the windows are smashed with a large stone. Now, things like a computer, a cell phone, USB keys, and a printer go missing. Now, the 27th of October, a principal from a local nursery school in Milan, so he's now back up in Milan, found Rudy coming out of her office, and he claimed that he was just drifting through and he just needed somewhere to sleep for the night. And she's like, no, you can't stay here. It's a bloody nursery school.
That's weird.
So she's like, you need to leave. So she notices that he has been rummaging through quite a lot of their stuff. So she just calls the cops, and they find a laptop, a cell phone, and a giant kitchen knife from the backpack they left at the nursery.
All the traveling essentials.
All of the traveling essentials. In case he wants to make a little chopped salad,
Yeah.
Look up a recipe. So the electronics match the items that were stolen from the law offices in Perugia. So Rudy is brought in, he is fingerprinted, but due to more pressing cases in Milan, the prosecutor just lets him go, telling him that he just needs to head back to Perugia and he needs to stay away from Milan.
Right.
It's actually these fingerprints that later connect him to Meredith's room.
Oh, okay. So this little run-in is actually, even though he didn't really get punished for it,
that's how they connect him to it.
Got him on record.
But I have a problem with that, though. If they had just sent him to prison when he was in Milan, rather than just letting him go,
he would have... Is it worth going to prison for? But I guess some kind of punishment.
Or even just arrested. Because remember, this is like the 27th of October, right? So if he'd even been arrested just for a few days, Meredith could still be alive.
Yeah.
Even if he was arrested for one day, or even arrested at all, because then he would be like, oh, I got in trouble, I need to just behave. Even if it's just for a few days, and she would have skirted free.
Could have changed his path. Yeah.
So after recognizing Rudy in the newspaper, a bartender from a club in Perugia reported a break-in at his home on September the 27th. So this is going back a month prior. And he recounts being waken up in the middle of the night by several noises in his apartment, but then the intruder manages to escape after threatening him with a knife. Now, of course, the bartender does report this incident that same evening. However, when the police asked him to come down to the police station to review some pictures, he gets to the police station and the line is just too long on arrival. So he's like, nothing was stolen, so I'm just going to go home and just not report it.
But he could have potentially identified him For a picture or something?
That's it. And again, what we have here is that if he just stuck in the line, again, maybe Rudy would have been arrested and maybe Meredith would still be alive. So that's 2 times now.
2, but I guess that one is not necessarily the police's fault. It's just someone that couldn't be bothered, which, I don't know, maybe you can get that really.
Series of unfortunate events, in my opinion. So later, the barman sees Rudy at the bar and he just has bouncers remove him. But it wasn't until he sees him in the paper that he knows that his name is Rudy, and then he goes to the police. But of course,
too late now.
That's it. It's now October the 31st, and Rudy says that he goes to a Halloween party with some Spanish girls that he's been hanging out with. He claimed on the Skype call to his friends that he had met Meredith that night and they planned to see each other again, but Meredith obviously had a boyfriend at that time. So Rudy's story changes a lot. So we don't really know for sure, and this last bit that I have about his whereabouts is a little bit hazy, but on the 1st of November, on the night of the murder, Rudy apparently goes to a friend's house around 11:30 p.m. and then he goes clubbing till 4:30 a.m. On the 2nd of November, there's a huge gap with nothing in between. And on the evening of the 2nd of November, Rudy goes back to the same nightclub with 3 American female students that he met at a bar. And after that is when he gets onto the train to Germany, where he's then found 7 weeks later. So he seems to have fled to Germany on around about the 4th of November. So in that gap between 11 p.m. and 4:30 a.m., obviously Meredith is murdered.
Yeah.
And he was apparently clubbing, but
no proof of that.
There's no real proof of that, really.
So they know that there's another male at the moment that has been connected at the scene, but the police are still like hell-bent on it being Amanda and her boyfriend.
It's kind of catch-22, right? The media are all over the fact that it was Amanda and Raphael. You've got Manini, who is hell-bent on it being someone ungodly, and that person is Amanda. She's got the devil in her. And also it's like a case of, we don't want to lose face, so we have to make this fit.
But that's just so ridiculous when they've got, surely they would see some of this evidence. They might not know who it was at this moment in time or have everything, but surely there's enough doubt there. It baffles me.
The thing is, they're confident enough they want their cake and they want to eat it. So they don't want to lose face. They're confident that they've got the guy who was involved, which was Rudy, but they're going to say, we can also pin it on these other 2 as well. And Adam, you're forgetting something here. They're successful at it.
Yeah.
Twice. She goes through 2 trials. They now have Rudy, who is brought in because his DNA is, of course, all over the body and, of course, the house. So he immediately consults a lawyer and they ask to fast track his trial so that he is trialed completely separate from Amanda and Raphael. Suspicious?
That seems a bit odd.
So it's apparently something that you can do in Italy when you admit partial guilt. Again, his story changes. He now says that he went to the house that night and Amanda and Raphael are there.
Oh, so he's changed his story now.
According to them, a sexual game is instigated by Amanda and Raphael, but Meredith does not want to participate.
So this came from him, I remember this in the news.
Probably come from his lawyer, right?
Right, okay.
Rudy alleges that Amanda forces the boys to assault Meredith and then Amanda kills Meredith with a knife.
Okay, that's weird.
They have an animation, Adam.
They have an animation?
They make an animation.
Of what, like a reenacted of what happened?
Yes. And what's crazy is like the jury are like lapping it up as if it's CCTV evidence. It's really heartbreaking. It completely destroys Amanda.
And that's someone's job. Can you like recreate this event in CG?
Yeah, based on what? Oh, just based on what I say. No footprints, no whereabouts, no CCTV, no evidence of how they moved around the room. No, just do what I say.
So how weird that this guy, Rudy, has gone, oh no, Amanda's not involved. I was there, but I didn't, I heard a commotion and then completely backtracked now that he's got a solicitor.
Crazy, huh? So previously, of course, the story was that Amanda wasn't present at all. However, after seeing a lawyer, he changes the story, which completely devastates Amanda because, of course, it's a big fat lie, right? But this new version of the story perfectly feeds in to this prevailing public perception about Amanda, with a story of her being this wild, seductive femme fatale. The world's captivated by that story. And basically, what's disgusting is that even after this admission of guilt, the press still mostly ignore Rudy because he just wasn't as interesting as Amanda Knox in the femme fatale narrative.
Yeah. It's
mental.
I didn't know that this guy existed, really, to be honest.
Exactly, but the evidence is just overwhelming against him. So Rudy is ultimately sentenced to 30 years in prison, which is reduced to 16 years on appeal. And even though the guilt is evident, due to good behavior, he is released from prison on the 23rd November 2021, having served just 13 years of his 16-year sentence.
So he is found guilty and he does serve time. So, but he is not the main culprit.
He's saying that it was partial guilt. So he says, I did it, but I didn't act alone. But because he's managed to plea or claim partial guilt, he is able to get his trial fast-tracked ahead of Amanda's, because I think it's just a way of getting a lesser sentence for him.
Okay.
Otherwise, if they had the trial first, then they might not look good for him.
Okay.
If she wins her trial.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. It just makes me sick that his handprint is in Meredith's blood, and that links him directly to the crime scene. Yet that focus still remains on Amanda and Raphael.
Yeah.
Just because the authorities want to maintain this weird stance that they have.
They don't want to lose face after all the or supposed evidence that they've got on her.
So after Rudy's sentencing, everyone goes along with this kind of drug-fueled sex game narrative, which really does affect Amanda's trial, because every appearance she makes in court just fuels more of that media kind of scrutiny. They constantly discuss her appearance and her behavior. For instance, when she smiled upon seeing her family in court, it's twisted into like she's smiling after committing a murder. Like, what a terrible person she is. And what a terrible misrepresentation of being relieved and happy to see your family member.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
Or your mum and your dad.
If she was actually guilty, we'd probably feel different, but because we know that she was disapproved.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly. So another issue was the slow pace of the trial due to Italy's weird tradition of breaking up for the summer. So they have to pause for 2 months, and that just makes the process even more agonizing for Amanda, because in between the slow decision making or siestaing, she's just living in agony, right? Stuck in prison for a crime that she did not commit.
So are you telling me if I became a lawyer in Italy, I would get summer off?
Yeah.
That's a thought.
It's too late for you to make a career change, Adam. So the prosecution leaned heavily into the sex game narrative, and despite the DNA evidence not linking Amanda strongly enough to the crime scene, the defense team requests that the DNA be retested. But this is completely dismissed by the judge. And the defense team are like, what? But it's not strong enough, clearly. It's trace evidence. And he's like, yeah, it's just not necessary.
Really?
Yeah.
So he wants this over and done with.
I think so. So after they come back from summer break, the judge finally finds Amanda guilty, and she is sentenced to 26 years in prison. And literally, the crowd erupts, right? And Amanda leaves, and as she's leaving, she just collapses. She cannot even stand up. She is so shocked. She just did not see this coming. She honestly thought that she would be exonerated.
It feels like a nightmare. You must think that they're going to realize something's going to come up and get me off this hook, when you know deep down, I've got nothing to do with this.
Sure. I can't imagine it. Raphael, however, is given 25 years. Now, Amanda Knox is given the additional year for the false accusation that she made against Patrick. Now, typically, in Italy, false accusations carry like a 3-year sentence, but the judge reduces it down to 1, considering that Amanda Knox has already served 3 years in prison.
So she's already got 3 years in prison already by this point.
Yeah, just 3 years later.
Damn.
It's devastating, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm exhausted.
Poor Amanda. So after sentencing, Prosecutor Manini goes around shaking everyone's hands, and he's kissing all sorts of babies. And he's literally boasting.
Why are there babies at court?
No, you know what I mean. It's like a politician thing. He's doing the rounds and he's been celebrated. Sorry, that made him sound really creepy. Sorry. But you know what I mean. That's what politicians and these type of people do. So he's boasting about how he solved the crime of the century and how he found the knife and the DNA and how he managed to connect all the dots. So obviously, Amanda and Raphael, they appeal. But it takes forever for the appeal to come through. And meanwhile, what the documentaries don't tell you is that Raphael actually spends 6 months in solitary confinement. And during this time, he starts to communicate through letters. And Raphael sends Amanda flowers for her birthday, white lilies, which are her favorite. But sadly, the guards won't let her have them at all, which I guess you're in prison, but
yeah,
it'd be nice if she'd got some flowers, you know what I mean?
But then I guess if you're a prison guard, you're thinking you're a murderer. So.
Yeah. So Amanda, she writes back to him and she just says to him, do you know what? I'm not interested in you anymore. Don't contact me anymore. And yeah, it really breaks his heart because he was really in love with her, which is so sad. So Amanda also talks about her experience entering prison. Like she talks about all the invasive male doctors examining her and even taking pictures of the inside of her vagina.
Why do they need to do that?
God knows. I'd check for drugs. I don't know. God knows. It's gross. Maybe it's to humiliate them, probably.
Possibly.
Subjugation, who knows? She also faces loads of sexual harassment from various guards who would say things like, you're going to have sex with me because you're a slut and things like that because of like this reputation that she has. It's horrible. One of her confidants in prison is this chaplain who over time, like after getting to know her, he like truly believes that she's innocent. And apparently like he is really instrumental in just keeping her sane throughout the entire ordeal, all those 3 years. So in prison, she does have some roommates. She has one who is this American roommate who is really nice, actually. And she really advises her well. She teaches her how to be tough in prison, you know, how to trade tampons for like kind of minutes on the phone.
Very Orange is the New Black.
Yeah, that's how I imagined it when I was reading through it. By the way, I made that up about the tampons, right?
Oh.
No, I just, because that's what you see on, she doesn't mention that in the book, but I imagine that's what she probably had to do, you know?
Okay.
And she'll show her the ropes and things like that. So sadly, she was released and Amanda was still in prison, but they continued to write to each other, which was really nice. And she would offer her advice on what to do in certain situations. So I guess, yeah, there's just no friend like a friend that you meet in prison, you know? While you're drinking like wine out of a toilet. That's where the best bonding's done, you know?
Moonshine.
Moonshine, yeah. Can you imagine like using your toilet to make some wine, but then you desperately needing a wee? Like you just ruined the batch of wine, or like having explosive diarrhea.
Oh.
He's like, Adam, you just ruined the wine.
Why is it me?
I don't know. You sound like a kind of guy who would have explosive diarrhea.
Shut up.
So the media's first comment about her during the appeal was about, obviously, her appearance, as it always is, saying how skinny she looked and perhaps she needed to have her hair and makeup done, which is mental because if she had her makeup and hair done, they would have said, oh, look how she's like trying to make herself look presentable. Or they probably found something negative to say about her, which is just awful. And so again, as with so many high profile cases involving young women, it always just comes down to that appearance, which just is completely detracting from the real issue at hand. And that is she's trying to prove that she's not bloody guilty, you know?
Yeah. And does she like dress appropriately for that? How does she do that? Does she dress timidly and, plain and everything? Or does she try and dress assertive or...
That's it. And if she chose any one of those avenues, they would find the negative angle on that.
Yeah.
So in her book, she writes about how she like couldn't show any joy when she saw her family at all. She just had to have this kind of dazed, focused look on her face at all times. And she made a few statements during her time in court. At first, they were strong and clear, but halfway through, like the pressure really gets to her and she just ends up breaking down. And like during the second statement that she makes, like she was just overcome with tears, like in sadness. So something of course that you would probably expect under kind of these types of circumstances, right? Of course, this was interpreted as a sign of, again, instability. So again, putting a negative spin on it. Guilt, probably. Oh, she can't face up to it, like she's remembering what she's done. She can't deal with it. And once again, every time the press just jump at it. So during the appeal, they have a different judge, and the appeals process in Italy is a little bit different to how it is in the United States, where, of course, Amanda is from. So in Italy, an appeal isn't about reviewing the same evidence. It's about bringing in brand new evidence. Okay. And I think the UK is similar in that sense. So the lawyer argues that fresh forensic scientists are needed to be brought into kind of the investigation because the previous investigation was completely botched. So it needs to all be done again and all reassessed.
Okay.
So the request is granted and a new forensic scientist comes aboard and he completely criticizes everything about the original investigation. He shows how every single scene of the crime was like contaminated in some way. This is where he shows that footage showing how the people that were examining the evidence were just literally touching everything one after the other. They were picking certain items up, putting them down, picking the next bit up. They weren't changing gloves. They weren't bagging things up properly. They were just putting them all in the same thing. You could even see them handling kind of the bra clasp that had Raphael and Amanda's DNA on it and how they would then also touch other items.
Right.
And that's how that DNA got on there.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's quite an odd place to find that. But if they're just so not careful.
And remember, the bra clasp wasn't found for weeks and weeks. So in that time, there's loads of opportunity for DNA to get on that bra.
Yeah.
So the new scientist confirms that Raphael's DNA was on the bra clasp, but points out that it didn't necessarily mean that he had touched it. It only suggests that the item had come into contact with something that he had touched. And the DNA evidence on the knife originally claimed to belong to Meredith was also disputed because the quantity of DNA on this knife was too small for it to be anything definitive at all. And also the knife had also been stored in a location that could have easily just been cross-contaminated by other items anyway.
I really hate to think about the other like criminal investigations these forensics and detectives worked on if they let something as big and high profile as this go to crap.
You probably don't ever hear about any of them.
Yeah.
So at this point, the narrative begins to shift and the American media catch wind of what's happening in this case. They're like 4 years too late. It's crazy. So as the forensic evidence is presented, it becomes clear that Amanda and Raphael's DNA wasn't where it was initially reported to be. Instead, Rudy's DNA is found everywhere. However, rather than showing remorse for the damage that was caused by their initial reporting, the media are just instead excited about the new twist in the story.
Oh, God.
And they're basically just assume this new angle without being accountable at all for the damaging angle that they took initially.
Right.
It's just so sickening. So a reporter even admitted that he didn't feel guilty for publicizing kind of Amanda's prison diaries and making references about about what had happened. Instead, he just puts all the blame on the legal system. And when pressed about this, his response was like, what was I supposed to do? Like, check every fact that we get?
Yes, you're supposed to be a journalist, you moron.
That's exactly what you're supposed to do. So one of the key journalists was this British guy called Nick Pisa. He's the main guy, right, that led a lot of this media across the world. He becomes heavily involved. And he's now mostly a tabloid writer working for papers like the Daily Mail and the Mirror, right? So he gets picked for this job because he can translate everything really easily, but most importantly, quickly. And so because of this, most papers go with like his stories. So he writes the stories and they then take his stories to then write their own stories. You know what I mean? It's like secondhand information, which just perpetuates everything. So because he has this background in tabloid journalism, the entire thing explodes because he knows how to write these kind of sensationalist kind of articles. What a motherfucker.
Yeah.
I just can't believe it. And he's still about today.
Still spreading lies.
Nick Pisa. Fuck you, Nick. He says in the documentary that if he didn't report things immediately, someone else would have got the headline. So he just wanted to be the guy to be bringing all the news. And he was. But at what cost? And it's astonishing to me that he didn't even stop to think about the potential repercussions on this woman's life and also Raphael's life, because we always seem to forget him in this story.
Do you know there are better detectives and journalists on Reddit than this guy?
Yeah, internet sleuths. You should have got them on this case.
Yeah.
She could have gone to jail forever, and he's just directing all this attention to an area that's just making the newspapers more and more money rather than towards the objective truth.
Yeah.
So he genuinely seems to believe that he didn't play a role in this at all. And he puts more blame on the police investigation than he does on himself and the media. And I personally think that the guilt lies probably equally between both parties, because lots of people call this a trial by media, right? But the fanciful prosecution were playing into this because they were trying to drive a specific narrative.
Yeah.
So it's both of their faults, right? They're both using each other.
Exactly. And the police aren't going to back down or admit fault when this guy has been pushing these stories.
And they don't. Amanda made an interesting point during her appeal. She felt that instead of looking at the evidence, they were just studying her reactions, and they were constantly showing her things just to observe her reactions, which isn't objective evidence at all. Like, you can't base something on someone's reaction because it's not like people react in different ways, right?
Big brother.
So there's a significant amount of evidence presented in the appeal that indicates that Amanda and Raphael are completely innocent. However, the prosecution doubled down on their story, and they maintained that they were just representing justice for Meredith and painted Amanda as this diabolical, even suggesting that she was performing satanic rituals, which we're going to come back onto because Manini, he has a history of this.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So in a bizarre twist, Amanda is sentenced to an extra year in prison for slander against the prosecution. Yeah.
Another year?
Yeah, because she apparently, so she claims that Detective Rita Thakara had hit her during an interrogation, which she maintains is a lie. She gets convicted of slander, and she gets an extra year added on to her sentence.
So 27 years she's serving.
Mm-hmm.
And does that include the 3 years that she served before the sentencing? Or is that...
I guess that's...
Or could it be all of it?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. I think because, I don't know.
So we're looking at 27 to 30 years, whatever that is.
They also brought 2 men in who were in prison with Rudy. And these men say that on 2 separate occasions, Rudy had apparently told them what had happened. Apparently, Rudy told them that he went to Meredith's house with a friend intending to fool around with her. At one point, Rudy takes a break. Again, he goes to the bathroom. I think that's the only thing that's true.
He went to the bathroom to have a poo.
And when he returns, his friend is trying to restrain Meredith and trying to rape her. So the friend is, hey, Rudy, come on. And Rudy just agrees. And then they take turns restraining her while the other rapes her. And then afterwards, they kill her because they don't want her to report the crime.
Right. And so they find another person's DNA?
That's the thing. So they say that Rudy then broke the window in the bedrooms to make it look like a burglary. And according to the evidence, it looked like the window, however, was broken from the inside, even though the rock was found in the room.
Right.
And the guess is that he had brought the rock back in. Now, the only reason I don't think a third person was involved is that Rudy's DNA is literally all over the room, right? There is a third party's DNA, yes, but it's just trace amounts of DNA, which could have got there in all sorts of different ways. Remember, Philomena and her friends were in the room when they discovered the body. The police are in and out as well. She lived with a bunch of people, like it's a dorm room, for God's sake.
But I guess regardless, this confession, whether there was another person or not, is him admitting that there was no Amanda Knox.
Correct. But the prosecution, as I mentioned, they just keep doubling down. He has this appalling recreation made, which I mentioned earlier on, that depicts what he thinks happened on the night of the murder. So Amanda has to just sit there watching herself instructing her boyfriend and Rudy to rape her roommate and then watch herself kill her roommate, which is mad. What is mad is that the jury is hugely influenced by this. As I said earlier on, they think that they're like watching CCTV footage, but it's blatantly just a stupid animation.
That's terrible.
If you get the opportunity to look it up, it's ridiculous. So then the appeal process goes on summer break again. So Amanda has to wait another 6 weeks in prison to find out what the outcome of her appeal is going to be. And as it went badly, of course, the last time, you can only imagine just how anxious she's probably.
6 weeks to wait for this decision.
Yeah.
That just feels unfair.
It is unfair, right? But just like that, when the court resumes, the new judge acquits them both.
Really?
Yeah. But Italy is, at this point, furious. She leaves to the sounds of the Italians literally, imagine Game of Thrones, screaming shame at her.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So they have bought into
100%.
The whole press.
And they should all be ashamed.
Right.
So in her book, she talks about how she is driven back to prison to collect all of her things. And when she gets there, she gets to say goodbye to some of her friends. And she talks about how there are these kind of weird superstitions in prison. When you leave, you're supposed to break your toothbrush because that's your link to prison. And so breaking it breaks that link.
Right.
You're also supposed to give your bed sheets to your roommate. And I can't get this out of my head. Then when you're leaving, you have to drag your right foot along the ground in a line.
What?
So that the next prisoner that comes in is then freed. It's like a weird superstition.
So you're dragging your leg behind you as if you've got a limp or something like that.
Yeah, that's how I imagine Amanda doing it, and she does it.
Or like when Kevin Spacey in The Usual Suspects,
Mm.
he's walking along and all of a sudden he then starts walking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's weird.
So in some accounts, they say you scuff your foot, but in this account here, you drag your foot along. So I thought that was quite
And did
interesting.
she do those things?
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
Good.
So Amanda is driven away to a safe house in a car because absolutely they cannot stay in a hotel because Italy are furious.
Mm-hmm.
And her mother and stepfather follow them in the car. And when they are far enough away, the car pulls over. And that's the moment that she's reunited with her mum.
Oh.
Isn't that sad? Can you just imagine getting out on the side of a road? And just I can just imagine them just running at each other and just bracing each other. So, of course, the prosecution team keeps slandering her. And in the documentary, they talk to the man who defended Rudy, right? And they ask him point blank, do you think that you were a good lawyer? What do you think he says?
Yes.
At first, he gets mad. And then he says, who managed to get their clients through the legal system real fast and is now out of jail?
Oh, so he did a good job, but
Well,
not
I guess,
ethically.
Yeah, I guess ethically, which to be fair, he's supposed to be working in the interest of his clients. So
True.
It's a good comeback.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eventually, Amanda gets home to the USA and the press are, of course, all over her. And there's this intriguing moment with the press and her father where they ask, are you going to share the story? Is she going to be writing a book? Is she going to give interviews? What's happening? And they implied that if she waited, then like she wouldn't be that popular later on. And her father responds with, I don't see my daughter as a popular commodity. She's my daughter. This is her life. Leave her the hell alone.
Yeah.
Which I think good for him. So 6 years later, back in Italy, the prosecution make their appeal. So they're still at it. Jesus, just let it go.
Yeah.
Of course, Amanda doesn't attend. And guess what? She is found guilty again.
So who is representing her at this appeal? Because if she doesn't turn up, but what people?
I guess she's just not there.
She's thinking, oh, they're not going to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
But she gets found guilty. And what do they find her guilty on this time? Because have they not got to have new evidence?
Apparently. Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
All I know is that she gets found guilty again.
Okay.
Now, the lawyers in Italy appeal once more. And the final appeal, they are entirely exonerated. Right? That means they can never be tried again. It's done now.
Is there like a maximum you can have on this?
Something like that, yes.
So she's been found guilty, still guilty, acquitted, guilty, exonerated.
I've lost track, if I'm honest. So when they receive the news, the two of them, Amanda and Raphael, they call each other and they're just like, we're free.
Oh.
We're free. It's done. It's over. Case closed. And it just can't be revisited again. Sadly, Meredith's family still believe that Amanda was the killer. And from what I understand, they're confused. They've even suggested that if Amanda's not guilty, then who is? I mean, it's just Rudy on his own. But they seem to believe that there must be another murder out there because they don't believe that Rudy would have acted alone.
Okay.
But I just believe it's Rudy, you know? And listen, even if I don't agree, I do understand their position, which appears to stem from their trust in the police and the prosecution, right? Who were treating them with respect and who told them, you know what, we're going to find the person who killed your daughter.
Yeah.
And we're going to go and get them for you. So I get it. I get where they're coming from. The Supreme Court cites stunning flaws in the evidence and the investigation, as well as the excessive media attention which the case attracted, which they say led to the frantic search for guilty parties. And they say that it was this lack of biological evidence that ultimately led to their exoneration. So to sum up, what the Supreme Court is saying here is that this was a witch hunt. And they're saying it in a very roundabout way, right?
Yeah.
With the police, the prosecution, and the media, they're all playing their own part in this, but it was all just a witch hunt.
I think the thing is, like, with the evidence being like trace DNA, surely, or, you know, if you look at, so my understanding with a jury, they need to be able to find someone guilty without any sort of reasonable doubt or anything like that. And if there's for me, there's been nothing presented that suggests like there isn't doubt with her sort of thing.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it, does it? So the documentary also features an interview with Manini, you know, Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
And he says that if Amanda and Raphael are innocent, then I hope they can forget the whole ordeal. But if they're guilty, he says, God will now ultimately judge them because now it's out of my hands.
Oh, it kind of feels like poor him. Poor him that, you know, he tried to do his best, and now what else can he do?
I hope he doesn't do nothing else because...
He should retire. I hope he retired.
Yeah, for sure. Manini still maintains that he was acting for good. And he is eventually promoted to general prosecutor in Perugia. So God help whoever ends up running into legal trouble under his watch.
Yeah, you just have to have some dodgy makeup and you could be found guilty.
What do you mean?
If it seems to find any...
Oh, yeah. Reason. Oh, that's the devil in you. Yeah. So there's this quote from Amanda, which is just so fitting to the story. People love monsters. So when they get the chance, they want to see them. So sad.
Yeah.
Interesting to note that this wasn't Prosecutor Manini's first controversial case. There was another case known as the Monster of Florence between 1968 and 1985. Apparently, the killer targeted mostly women and was notorious for mutilating the bodies after they were killed. He coins the murders as some kind of satanic ritual. He ends up being part of the prosecution team where he wrongly, again, implicates this farmhand for the murders. The case is largely circumstantial and really baseless, and the trial is heavily criticized, which leads to the farmhand ultimately being acquitted in the end on appeal. So he gets charged, he gets arrested, he gets sentenced, and then he appeals, just like Amanda. But so even then, he was known for weaving together patterns to make things fit, to make himself look like a hero. But this whole satanic thing was very present in this case, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So in 2010, Manini is convicted of abuse of office in a separate case related to the Monster of Florence all those years ago. But he never actually serves any actual jail time. So unfortunately, he's still out there and he's still trying cases.
Is he?
Yeah. Not bad. So Amanda has since gone on to do some really remarkable stuff. So during her appeal, one of her friends from back home moved to Perugia to help Amanda through the trial. And she made contact with a guy called Saul Cassin, who is known as like the godfather of the Innocence Project, which I just love this project. So basically, it helps to exonerate people who are like wrongly convicted of various crimes. And Saul has also contested the reed technique in interrogations, which the Peruvian detectives used in Amanda's case and still continue to use in loads of cases. Well, pretty much it's just standard practice.
Still, right now.
As far as I'm aware, I think it's going through some kind of reform, or it's gone through some kind of reform in the last few years, but I don't know if it's quite fully there. But basically, the reed technique is an interrogation method that was developed in the 1950s, and it's characterized by kind of the high-pressure environment that they put the interviewee through, which is composed of three core components, something called factual analysis, the interviewing, and then the interrogation. So the interrogation process that's the last bit, is like super accusatory, where the investigator tells the person being interrogated, like, all the evidence points to your involvement in the crime. And apparently there's 9 steps involved that they take the person through this interrogation process. It's confrontation. It's like theme development, whatever that means, handling of denials, overcoming objections, procurement of retention of the kind of suspect's attention, handling the suspect's kind of passive mood, presenting an alternative question, having the suspect orally relate to various details of the offense. That's we saw this kind of same thing with Jennifer Pan, where they were like, okay, tell me the story again. Oh, now tell me the story backwards. Now tell me the story this way. And what does it look like if you're looking up from the top of the ceiling? But yeah, after that, then it's converting the oral confession into a written confession, which is what they did with Amanda. But critics argue that the Reed technique often leads to false confessions. And this led to a false confession with Amanda.
I still find that so bizarre, but I guess not. I can't understand because I haven't been under that pressure. But to think that you would put your name to something which, you know, in a sane mind,
I think it could happen to you easily. Yeah. I think you're just underestimating the power of no sleep, no food.
Yeah,
and being on your period.
I'm not sure about that.
So Saul explains that false confessions aren't rare at all, and that over a quarter of people exonerated by the Innocence Project had falsely confessed to their crimes. And Amanda now actually works on the Innocence Project herself, which is awesome.
Right. That's good.
She also has her own podcast called Labyrinth, and she has another one called The Truth About True Crime. And she's married, and I think she's got a kid.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, as we mentioned already, Rudy was released from prison on good behavior despite the court convicting him of both rape and murder. And Meredith doesn't really get much attention at all.
I was going to say, it's all about Amanda, isn't it?
It really is. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have Meredith's name in the title of this podcast, because ultimately it is a story about Meredith Kercher.
Yeah, but we don't seem to talk about it anywhere near as much as Amanda. And yes, because unfortunate things happened to Amanda afterwards. But at the end of the day, it's Meredith that lost her life.
Yeah. And also even Rudy as well. It's also a story about Rudy, but it doesn't really factor in him either. So the Netflix documentary aimed to get a first-hand account of all the main people involved. But the Kerchers just did not want to be involved in any way with anything related to Amanda because they still firmly believe that she killed their daughter. And yeah, that's the story of Amanda Knox and Meredith Kercher.
Yeah, I hope that is obviously Amanda is innocent and everything like that, because we sympathized with her based on what was proven and everything else and all the lack of evidence.
Hey, do you know what? At the end of the day, the sources that I looked at were the Netflix documentary and her book. And I wanted to hear it from their perspective. Meredith is not here to hear her side of the story, unfortunately. I can go ahead and read Raphael's book. He's got one out, Honor Bound, but he wasn't the main focal point on this at all. I'd be interested to read Rudy's, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was just full of lies. I don't think I'd be able to trust it.
He's got a book?
He is in the process of writing a book. He wasn't really in the Netflix documentary. Some of the lawyers that represented him were. The thinking was that he is probably going to be writing some kind of book at some point soon about his account. So that's probably why he didn't want to be part of the Netflix deal or any of the interviews.
So he has his own thing, but at the moment, everything points to him, and yet he's getting a book? That just feels gross.
That's what they speculate, just because of his lack of involvement.
Okay, with you.
So he might be holding up because he couldn't write the book in prison because you're not allowed to profit off of something of a crime until you've paid your debt or something like that.
But he killed someone. Yeah. It's not like he burgled something and was like, oh, I'm going to tell you how I managed to unpick a lock and everything like that.
So that brings us to the end of another episode of the Compendium, an assembly of fascinating and intriguing things. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, that was a good two-parter. It was worth waiting the week.
Oh, I'm really glad.
What happened. But yeah, it was interesting because I think as we just talked about, it's all been about sort of Amanda, but didn't know the rubbish criminal system in Italy.
And the press's kind of involvement in this as well.
The bloody Daily Mail and whatever. Yeah.
Right, should we roll the credits?
Okay.
Great. So we hope you've enjoyed this week's journey into intrigue with us. For more, remember, subscribe and drop us a 5-star cheeky review and schedule your downloads so you never miss an episode. It really helps us to grow the show when you do and allows us to bring you more fascinating stories. Join us beyond the show by following us at the Compendium Podcast on Instagram. And also, don't forget to now visit us on our digital home on the interwebs at thecompendiumpodcast.com. New episodes are released every Tuesday, so join us next week where we'll delve into another captivating story. And until then, stay curious. See ya.
See ya.